Our next session is on hidden query extraction. And to present and deliver the same, we have with us Professor Jayant R. Haritsa. He is a senior professor in the Department of Computational and Data Sciences and the Department of Computer Sciences and Automation at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. His core research interests are the design, implementation, and testing of database systems. He is known for pioneering contributions to the design and optimization of database engines that form the core of modern enterprise information systems. He's also produced software tools for SQL query optimization and relational database testing. Professor Jayant, ladies and gentlemen, is the recipient. Listen to me carefully when I say this, and I want you all to applaud. He is the recipient of the Shanti Swaroop Bhatnagar Prize for Science and Technology in 2009, as well as 2014 Infosys Prize in Engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, this is also engineering and computer science from the Infosys Science Foundation itself. He's currently the president, ACM India Council. He was named as an ACM Fellow in 2015 for his exceptional contributions to the theory and practice of data management systems. He's also an IEEE, INAE, INSA, IASC, and JC Bose National Fellow. He received his PhD Computer Science from the University of Wisconsin. Ladies and gentlemen, with the loudest round of virtual applause, let's welcome on the screen Professor Jayant R. Haritsa. Over to you, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Oh, so thank you, Fatima, very much for that extremely warm welcome. So what I'll try to do is, can I try to share my screen now?
Yes, please.
Okay. You can probably tell me if this comes out right or not.
Sure. Looks perfect. You can go ahead.
So is this okay? So again, thank you to Huawei and on behalf of the ACM India also for organizing this excellent two-day symposium and for the very kind introduction right now. So what I'll be doing is to present in this talk a software tool called Unmask, which is meant for non-invasively extracting opaque queries from database applications. And this is joint work that has been done with Kapil Khurana, who was a master's student during 2018 to 2020 from our lab. So the material that I'll be discussing today is sourced from the publications that you see listed on the slide. And there is also a project website where there are both short and extended videos on the underlying concepts, as well as a demo video showing Unmask in action. So getting back to the talk, the queries embedded in database applications may often become invisible or opaque. And this could be either because of explicit hiding, where the application has been deliberately encrypted or obfuscated for either protective or malicious purposes. It could also happen simply because the original source code has been lost and only the executable remains with us. And this scenario is especially common with legacy apps. Alternatively, opacity may also arise from implicit hiding, where the source is available, but the query has been written in an extremely complex manner or in dense imperative code. So as a proof by example of explicit opacity, here is a report on what happened about 2 decades ago, where in fixing the Y2K bug, it was found that in as many as 40% of the affected cases, the source code had either been lost, misplaced, or maybe not even acquired. On the flip side, there are popular tools like SQL Shield that support the hiding of source code. And it's not just the code, but also all the related data structures, including procedures, functions, views, execution plans, and the audit logs. Yet another instance of explicit opacity via encryption is shown in this simple code snippet, which is the hex encoded version of an SQL injection attack on the database system security. So the payload here is really select star from passwords. Let me see, yeah, from passwords, but that has been encrypted in a way that is opaque to the database system. A corresponding example of implicit opacity is the hard to comprehend SQL query that you see on this left-hand side, which is actually produced by an object relational mapping tool, or an ORM tool as it's known in the industry, that converts object-oriented specifications to relational equivalents. However, if you analyze this query, it can actually be converted into the much simpler format that you see on the right-hand side here. And notice that this is not just a matter of elegance of taking a bloated query and making it lean, but it's also likely that the database query optimizer is going to come up with a much more efficient plan for this representation as compared to what you see here. So therefore, the problem that we have looked at in our research is the following. How do you extract opaque queries that are hidden under either mathematics or under software? So our motivation for extracting these opaque queries is that, as I just discussed, there are several use cases in the real world environments, ranging from security to performance to software engineering. So for instance, if the source code for some reason happens to be lost, we may wish to re-establish the logic connecting the database inputs to the observed reports that are being regularly generated by the organization. Now, how do we achieve this goal? One obvious possibility is to use forensic techniques that dissect the executable's object code, or alternatively, access the internal data structures such as the query plans and the logs of the database engine. But if the executable has been encrypted using a tool like SQL Shield, for example, then all of this information becomes unavailable. Further, such forensics have to be customized to the specific platform or application and may become even impossible in contemporary off-site deployments. So an alternative and non-invasive approach is to use lightweight active learning based techniques, which essentially infer the query purely from a carefully chosen set of input-output examples. On the plus side, this makes the extraction completely independent of the application and the platform, because you're only looking at the inputs and the outputs and not at the actual system itself. And as I said, it's also a lightweight technique because of the fact that you are not really interrogating or using heavyweight forensic techniques to dissect the internal code of the system. So while we all think that most of the machine learning techniques are of recent vintage, I would actually just like to show you an interesting anecdotal evidence that machine learning has been there for a long time, especially this notion of active learning, where you learn from input-output examples without actually looking into the system itself. And this happened in the Second World War, where some of you may be familiar, is that there is a very famous naval battle, which was called the Battle of Midway, which occurred in June of 1942. So this was just about 6 months after the Pearl Harbor incident, where a large part of the US Navy had been demolished at the port itself by the Japanese Navy. Now, in the mid-1942, the Japanese Navy was asked to complete this job and destroy the remaining part of the US Navy, because then they felt that they could have a complete control of the Pacific Ocean. So now the Americans also knew that the attack was coming. This was fairly obvious. And they were aware that the Japanese wanted to finish off the US Pacific Fleet. Okay? They knew the attack was coming, but they did not know where. And as you know, the Pacific Ocean is extremely large, so it's very hard to figure out exactly where this attack will be taking place. But they knew that through some code intercepts that the location of the attack was a place called AF. But they had no way of breaking the Japanese code at that time. They thought that the potential location of AF, which is the secret location, could be the Midway Island. So if you look back at the previous slide, Midway Island is located here which is in the essentially in the center of the Pacific here, to the west of Hawaii. And they thought it might be Midway Island, but they could not be sure. And if you're not sure, it's quite likely that you will disperse your forces and therefore be in deep trouble. So what they did is, knowing that they could not break the code, they sent out a fake uncoded radio message, giving an innocuous message saying that the Midway's water purification plant had broken down. And then what they observed was the Japanese naval traffic, and they found that within 24 hours, the Japanese traffic said that AF was short on water. And now they knew that AF was actually Midway. And because of knowing this, for the sole reason that they knew this location of it, they were able to completely prepare themselves. And subsequently, the tables were completely turned. The entire Japanese aircraft carrier fleet was completely destroyed. And this is often described as the most stunning and decisive blow in the history of naval warfare. It completely changed the trajectory of the Second World War. So this is similar to what we would be trying to do in the case of opaque queries. And here is our problem definition. We are saying that we have an executable which hosts an application called A. And within this is, let's say, an SQL query, Q sub H. And the H refers to the fact that it is hidden. We also have a sample database instance, D sub I, on which when you execute this application A, it produces a populated result. So when I say populated result, all I mean is that there is some output that is coming out, maybe 1 row, maybe 10 rows, maybe 1,000 rows, it doesn't matter. We don't care about the contents. We're just saying that it should not be empty. So if this application provides on this database instance a populated result, then we should non-invasively unmask this hidden query to reveal the original query in the application. And notice that the original query could either be native SQL or it could also be in the form of imperative code. The only reason that we require a populated result is that otherwise we would have to do very expensive trial and error database generation for producing output. Since our whole technique is predicated on looking at inputs and outputs, it's important that we get some output. We don't particularly care about the contents of the output, but we care about the cardinality of the output. Okay. Now, why is this a difficult problem? This has actually not been previously looked at by the database community until we started investigating it. The difficulty is that there are acute dependencies, as those of you who have written SQL queries would know, between the various clauses of the hidden queries. So for example, between the various filter operations and the groupings. Or there is also a possibility of schematic renaming where the output columns have completely different names to the source input columns on which they depend using the as or as operator. Further, there is result consolidation by the various aggregation functions like sum, average, min, max, and so on. And finally, you may also have the presence of computed column functions like the scalar UDFs or user-defined functions, which are extremely prevalent in most SQL applications. So therefore, things are very tightly connected up here, and it becomes a difficult job to uniquely extract this hidden query. So what we have done is to come up with this software tool called Unmask, which actually stands for Unified Non-Invasive Machine for SQL query extraction. And it combines two different techniques. One is database mutation, and the other is database generation to efficiently expose the hidden query. So the way that we do it is we first create a template query, which you see here, which is Q sub E, which is shown in the box on the right-hand side. And the template query has all the basic clauses, like here is the projection operators, here are aggregations, this is the tables, the join predicates, the filters, the group by, order bys, and the limit, and so on. And then it extracts these constituent clauses to fill out the template. So just to give you a tangible example of Unmask extraction capability before we look at the techniques that are used to do it, here is the encrypted version of query 3 of the TPCH benchmark. So you already saw that Ken referred to query 1 and query 5 of the TPCH benchmark. This is query 3 of the benchmark, which has subsequently been encrypted. So you actually cannot see what is inside here. And as you would see in this particular query, It's fairly complex. There are multiple joins between the three tables, customer, orders, and line item. There are various kinds of predicates, both the textual predicates like the one on building here, which is an equality predicate. There are range predicates on the dates related to orders and shipping. There are multiple group by columns. There is ordering. There is a limit on the number of rows in the output. There is also projection columns. Plus, there are these scalar UDFs that I mentioned, where you are essentially computing values based on the variables. There's also renaming of the columns and so on. Okay? So this is what you start with, and you do not know what is inside the box. It's completely opaque. And what we are able to do with our techniques is that this is the query that we are going to extract from what you see here. And it should be fairly directly obvious that what we have here is semantically identical to what you see in the original query. The only differences that you might see are minor syntactic issues. So for example, if you look at the group by here, it has order key, then ship priority, and then order date, whereas the original query had it in a different order. But please remember that group by is a set-based operator, so it really does not matter what is the sequence of columns. Similarly, you'll also see that for the dates that you see here, this is date less than 15th March 1995. We have changed it to date being less than or equal to 14th March 1995. So these are all minor syntactic differences, but the semantic content remains identical. Okay, so how does all this work? I'll now quickly walk you through the high-level internal design of Unmask. So Unmask operates according to the calibrated two-phase pipelines. This is phase 1 and this is phase 2. The inputs to this pipeline are the opaque executable. So this is E is the executable, where you just have some object code which you cannot open up. And here is a sample database instance on which you get some result. Okay? So again, we don't care about what the result is. We just care that it should be non-empty. And then what we do is the hidden query elements are methodically extracted in a sequential manner, starting with the from clause. Then we go on to join. Then we go on to the filter predicates. Then we go on to projection. After this, we are done with the mutation pipeline. We have established the SPJ core of the query. And then subsequently, for all the massaging operators like group by, aggregation, order by, limit, and so on, this forms the second part of the pipeline, which is using database generation techniques. And then finally, there is an assembler module here, which combines all these extracted elements into a standard canonical output format. And it also performs a suite of correctness checks in order to verify that the extraction has been correct. One of the important things to notice in this process is that this executable that you have here is actually invoked numerous times, typically in our extractions, probably hundreds of times, in order to produce the input-output examples. So if you did this on the original database, then it's obviously going to take a very large amount of time to keep running a heavy-duty executable on, let's say, petabyte databases. Therefore, in order to ensure efficiency, we have this optional tool here after the from clause, which is called the database minimizer, which essentially does a pre-processing step on the query tables that were identified in the from clause to ensure that the subsequent mutations and generations are carried out on minuscule databases that contain just a handful of rows. So what we ensure is that after this stage, all the databases that we deal with have very small number of rows. In fact, typically just 1 or 2, which then means that even though you repeatedly run the executable is being run on very tiny toy databases, and therefore it can be run extremely fast. So we'll now work through an example just to show you how this whole process goes about. So let's assume that there is a executable which is opaque called E, and here is a sample database taken from a university environment where you have student information, course information, faculty information, and students registered for courses with various kinds of marks here. And here is the output that you get when you run this executable, the opaque executable on this database, and you'll see that you have now new variables called name and score, and there's some information that is coming out here. And our goal is to figure out what is present inside this opaque executable here. So what we'll do is in the mutation pipeline is what gives you the core SPJ extraction. That's a select project join extraction. And what I'll do is I'll just show you a few high level clauses in the interest of time. So for example, if you wanted to find out which tables are participating in this query, that's a fairly simple task. What we do is we take each table in the schema by turn. So let's say your schema had about a few hundred tables. You take them, each of them by turn, and temporarily rename this table to something that is outside of the schema. So we'll call this as temp. Now we will execute the opaque application on this mutated schema and check whether it throws an error or not. So in most SQL engines, if you refer to a table that does not exist in the schema, immediately an error gets bubbled up to the application saying that you have referenced an invalid table. So if that happens, then we know that this table T, which had been temporarily renamed, is actually part of the query. So if you go through this iteratively, and this doesn't take much time, you will find that for the previous example that we showed in the previous slide, 3 of the tables, that student, enroll, and course, are part of the query. Faculty is not participating in this particular query. So we now have the from clause. And so this is the extracted query now, which is shown with a caret here to indicate that this is something which is a running process. We have extracted one clause of the hidden query. Then the next step is to do the database minimization, which, as I said, is critical for efficiency. And what our goal here is to say that you start with this initial database instance, create a reduced version of this database instance, such that if you remove any subsequent row of the tables from this minimized instance, then it leads to an empty result. So in that sense, this is a minimal database. And what is very interesting is that you can show theoretically that for fairly complex queries, which have all these different clauses, and as long as they are inner equijoins, there always exists a minimal database where each table in the set of tables corresponding to the query contains only a single row. Okay? So that's as small as you can pretty much get it. Okay? So if we applied this procedure on the, so I'll jump on this here. I'll show this to you by example. So what we do is we take the biggest table here and break it into half, and then look at whether a populated result comes out or not. Okay? So the first thing that we would do is to reduce enroll by half and rerun this executable here. Now, if you look at it, there is still some output which is coming here. So which means that even this reduced database is sufficient to produce a populated result. And we keep doing this until we retain a populated result. So the next stage is that we will reduce the student table by half, as we see here, and still we find that there is some populated output. We don't care about the values. We just care that it should be non-zero. So we keep doing this. And finally, what you get is, this is the minimized database, which is still capable of producing a non-zero output or a populated result. So there's a single row in student, a single row in course, a single row in enroll, and here is the output. So now the subsequent part of our mutation pipeline will only deal with this database, which is pretty much the smallest database that you could think of. Now, how do we extract the various filter predicates in the query? Okay, so here is an example. Let's assume that you want to check whether a particular column, t.a. So for example, this could be the age of the student. So it's student.age. And in the existing database that you have, this single row database, which has been minimized, let's say it has a value k, which would be in a domain range going from imin to imax. So for example, for age, it could be between 0 to 100. Now what we will do is we'll replace this value in this minimized database. This is the mutation part with the lowest value in the domain range. And again, we'll execute the executable. And we'll look at the result. So let's say the result was R sub 1. Similarly, we'll do the same thing by replacing this value in the minimized database with the maximum in the domain. Again, run this opaque executable, you get the result R2. So based on the contents of R1 and R2, you can have one of 4 cases. So these are the 4 cases. So it's possible that either R1 or R2 could be empty in terms of having no rows at all. So if you find that this is not empty in both the cases, that means that there was really no predicate. Whereas if you found that it was empty in both the cases, then it obviously means that there is a double-sided range predicate that you have, which is causing you to get empty result when you replace the original satisfying value with the minimum in the domain and the maximum in the domain. And therefore, your goal now is to find the the boundaries of the range predicate, which you see. And the other two cases would be in between. That is, you either have a left-sided range or a right-sided range. So here is an example. If you look at the credits column of the student table, we will use 0 as being the lowest value in the domain. And when we run this, we find that the output is 0, which corresponds to this particular case. And then we run it again with let's say the maximum credits is 20. When you run this again here, you find that the output is non-zero, which corresponds to this case here, which then tells you that this is a left-sided range predicate, a single-sided predicate, where your goal is to find the L, which is the value of the range predicate. So in this particular case, what would happen is, in order to find out this value L, which is the limit on the credits that you have, you would do that using a binary search between imin plus 1, because you found that it was left-handed predicate. So you do imin plus 1 and till the value k, which was a satisfying value. So in this case, this would be 1, 4, because 4 was the value for credits in the minimized database. And if you go through this process, you get L equal to 2. So the predicate that you had was credits greater than or equal to 2. That was the one of the filter predicates you have. So I'm not going to go through the rest of it. The textual predicates are much harder to extract because they have wildcards and regular expressions and so on. But what you will get at the end of this entire extraction is that you will get this information about the projection attributes, that sname is being projected as name. You also have this function that is marks into 1 plus credits into 0.01. The 3 tables, students, enroll, and course. I didn't talk about the join extraction. You can look up the paper for that. So these are the 2 join predicates. And then I just showed you how you got the filter predicate, which is credits greater than or equal to 2. There's also a textual predicate using the like operator. So this is the regular expression where it is CS percentage. So this is how we go about the process. But although the numeric filters are fairly simple, it's much more complicated to extract the join graph as well as the textual predicates. Okay, now I'll just quickly move over to the generation pipeline to show you what we do subsequent to mutation. Here, the goal is to extract out the group by, the aggregation, the order by, the limit clauses. So I'll just show you how the group by is done. The question that we are asking here is that, is there a particular column, for example, the order key or the order date or something like that, which exists in the set of group by columns? For this, we generate a synthetic database, D sub gen, but it's generated very carefully such that the intermediate SPJ core. Now notice that this intermediate core is not visible to us because all we see are inputs and outputs. But we can try to create a database based on our knowledge of the SPJ part of the query, such that even though this is hidden, we know what is happening inside the query. So we create a database such that this invisible intermediate core of which comes from the SPJ part of the query will contain exactly 3 rows, satisfying this condition, okay, that T.A will have a common value in exactly 2 rows. So this is the group by attribute that you're checking for existence in the group by predicate or clause. It will have a common value in 2 rows, while all the other columns will have the identical value in all 3 rows. So this is a very carefully constructed database. And what will happen is that if you create such a database, the final result you can prove this formally also, can have exactly 1, 2, or 3 rows. These are the possible values. And if it happens to have 2 rows, then you know that there indeed is a grouping on this attribute from table T. So let me just quickly show that to you an example here. So this is the entire algorithm, but we won't go through this here. Right now, what we want to do is that let's again go back to the database that we had, which was student, enroll, and course. And we want to check whether the student's roll number or student identifier is that part of the group by or not. So what we will do is that we will deliberately insert these values where you see that for the SID column, there are 3 rows. two rows will have identical values, 1 and 1, and the third one will have a different value. Whereas if you look at all the other columns, they have identical values in all the three rows. Okay? So there's A, and A here. There's computer science 0, 2 in these three columns. And similarly, if you go to the enroll table, what you will ensure is that you will just have two rows, one corresponding to this value and the other corresponding to the other value, because SID is a foreign key here. But again, if you look at the other columns, they all have identical values across the rows, and the course table has just a single row. Now, if you run the executable on this database, here is the hidden intermediate result that you will get, which will be with 3 rows. And subsequently, when the executable completes after doing the group by and other operators, this is what you will get. Okay? And since you see that there are 2 rows here, it automatically tells you, and again, you can prove this all formally, that because of the presence of 2 rows and not 1 row or 3 rows, which are the other 2 possibilities, it is indeed the case that student.sid is part of the group by clause. Okay, so this is the big picture, and using the similar techniques, it's a lot more complicated for doing things like aggregations and so on, where you have to solve a set of linear equations and stuff like that. But I just wanted to give you a high level feel for how we are going about this process. Now, let's say we have finished all of this. How do we know we have gotten this right or not? Okay. So the first step is in the final module is that we have a query assembler, which essentially fills in the original template that I showed you with all these extracted elements. And then it does what we call as query canonicalization, where it removes unnecessary predicates, that are redundant predicates. So for example, if you had t.a equal to s.b and s.b equal to r.c, and again t.a equal to r.c, which is implied by the other 2 sides of the triangle, then we would remove such predicates. Okay? So it also remove unnecessary columns and so on. We do all of this. And then we have just created the query here. How do we know whether we got it right or not? So one option we have is to try out the extracted query on the original database, d sub I, that's the original instance given by the user, and compare the results that we got from our extracted query and from the original query. But the problem is you could still have false positives. If there is a difference, of course, you know that we did something wrong. But even if they're the same, it is possible that because of the data contents, you coincidentally got something right. So for example, if the original query had an outer join and you have replaced it with the inner join in your extracted query, that would only show up if in the joining tables you had rows in the, let's say you're joining, let's say the R with S, you had rows in S that did not have a matching value in S. But if the original database given to you had matching rows for every row in R, there was a matching row in S, then this would not surface. Okay? So what we have done is to actually use a cute tool that was developed at IIT Bombay by Professor Sudarshan's group, which is called the XData grading tool. And the goal here was that I should be able to find out when students are making mistakes as compared to an idealized query given by the instructor. Doing this by hand is very time consuming and quite erroneous and painful also. So they used to deliberately create databases that would elicit these differences between a potentially incorrect student query and the model instructor query. So we can use a similar technique here in order to create deliberately databases that would likely show up any difference between our extracted query and the hidden query. Okay. So now, what did we finally get at the end of this process? This is the final query that we have. Okay. So again, we have a projection of the student initial, so this is the name in the input schema. This is in the output result. Now notice that earlier we just had marks into 1 plus 0.01 into credits. Now there's an aggregation function, which is sum, which has also been added on here. We have the 3 tables, which we already extracted in the from clause. There are 2 join predicates. There is also the filter predicates on both numeric filter predicates as well as textual predicates. Now the group by attributes have come, including student.sid, which I showed you that because of the presence of 2 rows, we could deterministically say that this is present in the group by set of attributes. We can also show you order by as well as a limit function. So often SQL queries, you don't want to get the entire set of results. You may want the top 10 rows. So in this case, this you would be ordering by the score. So you want the top 10 students in your course. And the limit 10 shows this up. So again, there are interesting techniques that are required to extract each of these different clauses. and many of them are not obvious because they have side effects on the other pieces of the puzzle, and therefore this has to be done carefully. Okay. So this was the extracted query, and then you might say, okay, what happened in the original query? This was the original query. And again, what you'll see is this is semantically identical to this, except that, for example, we'll have written credits greater than or equal to 2, whereas here it's written as credits greater than 1. So they're semantically identical, but syntactically will be different. Okay, now how long does all of this take? We have done extensive experiments both on native SQL queries like the TPC-H and the TPC-DS benchmarks, as well as job benchmark, which is based on the IMDb data set. Also, we have looked at imperative code, which comes from various kinds of applications. So I don't have time to go through all of them, but I'll just quickly show you one example. So this comes from the TPC-H benchmark and the DS benchmarks. So this is of a 100 GB instance of TPC-H, and this is 100 GB of TPC-DS. So the x-axis are the different queries in the benchmark. So if you are familiar with TPC-H, you know that there are 22 queries going from Q1 to Q22. These are some of the queries in the benchmark. Similarly, in the TPC-DS benchmark, there are 99 queries. And here are some of the numbers referring to the queries in the benchmark. Okay? So Q3, Q37, 96, and so on. On the y-axis, what we have is the extraction time. Okay? And without going to details, at a high level, what you can see is that in a few minutes, so this is in 10 minutes, and here this is even less, in just a couple of minutes, all the extractions are completed in just a few minutes. And in fact, if you analyze this, you'll find that the extraction times are comparable to the individual execution times. So this might again seem surprising given that we are running the executable hundreds of times. But the key issue was the minimization, where we create such a small database that even running the heavy duty executable on this toy database takes hardly any time. So you can see, for example, in this particular case in query 5, just running the executable on the original database given by the user took about 7 minutes. And for us, the entire extraction took only about 10 minutes. So the important takeaway from this experiment is that you can efficiently extract subsequent to doing minimization and using very small databases, both in the mutation module as well as the generation module. By carefully creating these curated data sets, you can very efficiently extract these fairly complex SQL queries. I'll probably skip this part about the imperative code conversion, but the point was that this is imperative code, and here's the SQL extraction. This was done in a few seconds on a 10 MB database. And what is more important, as I said, it's not just that you are able to convert imperative code to declarative code that you see here. The plans that are going to be used for the declarative version are going to be much better than what you would the execution with the imperative code. So there is a performance benefit and not just an elegance or software engineering improvement. There is a serious performance improvement, in fact, often to the extent of an order of magnitude. If you use this code, this would run 10 times slower than the code that you have here, because here the database query optimizer can come into play and improve the execution plan. Okay, so what is the current scope of the Unmask project? What I showed you so far was the bare bones clauses, S, P, J, G, A, O, and L. We have also extended it to other kinds of data types, including booleans, floats, nulls, and so on. We have also incorporated the having clause. This is much harder to do because you actually have to rework the pipeline sequence that I showed you earlier. Over the last couple of months, we are now also able to handle disjunctions, unions. So these are the set operators. We also handle outer joins. We recently been able to also handle negation operators like age not equal to 25, which is typically very hard to extract, but we now have an interesting mechanism by which you can do this. And all these additional constructs require you to go through not just once through the pipeline, but multiple iterations within the pipeline where you keep refining the query until you get the final version. Okay, so to wind up this presentation, we have introduced this new hidden query extraction problem with a variety of use cases ranging from performance to security to software engineering. And our tool Unmask does not take a forensic approach to the code, but non-invasively using this active learning technique of just looking at input and output examples, it efficiently extracts a substantive class of these application queries. The complete details are available on our website, which you can see here. And what about the future? Well, we are trying to expand the extraction scope to include nested queries, which are extremely common in database applications, but pose fairly difficult problems for us, especially when they're correlated. Independent nested queries are easy to handle because we do the decorrelation for free. But if you have correlated nested queries where the variables of the outer query are present in the internal query as well, then things become much harder. And also from a theoretical perspective, it would be interesting to characterize what are the limits that you can have for hidden query extraction. Yeah. So with that, I'll wind up my talk here, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions that you might have in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Haritsa, and it's always an honor to get an opportunity to listen to you. This particular work of yours is like on the verge of ethical hacking and reverse engineering. So you can, I don't know, you have limited it to just the databases. You can do probably many more things. So getting on to the questions that we have, I have a flurry of questions for you, number of them.
Yeah.
So when you extend this to a more complex query, like if with the size of query growing, how do you see like the time it takes to, or like, is there a limit to which you think that this will work efficiently and beyond which you don't want to take it?
Yeah, the more than the efficiency part, the difficulty might be is that if in the application you had multiple SQL queries interspersed at various locations in the application, and in between there is imperative code that we are not aware of, which affects the outcomes of these queries, then that becomes very hard to extract, because this can be arbitrarily programming logic that is in between two SQL queries. Then we would find it hard to extract. But if you are able to separate out these query invocations into JDBC calls, for example, then we would be able to extract the individual queries. And if the output was visible to us in the intermediate parts of the application, then we could extract it. But otherwise, if you have a general purpose program with some embedded SQL in between, and then the glue being some other kind of programming logic, that would be extremely hard to extract using our techniques. That would require something much more than this. So this is, in a sense, the poor man's version of query extraction, right?
Sure. A follow-up question. So the queries that are extracted after running the system, and you would have a step for checking and verifying the correctness. So like, was the correctness checking and fixing overhead minimum? Like, how do you minimize the checking overhead, that what you extracted is correct?
Right. So if we did go with the original approach that we had thought of, which was to just use large randomized databases and try this out, this could certainly become expensive because you have to run the executable in all those randomized databases, and you would have to compare the results. And even result comparison is not trivial. But more importantly, it's possible that you may miss out on the boundary conditions, which would cause errors between the between the opaque query and what you had extracted. And therefore, we have actually instead employed the Xdata grading tool, which, as I said, has been done in IIT Bombay. And deliberately, the tool produces, as far as possible, small databases. So again, Professor Sudarshan's tool tries to produce the minimal database on which there is going to be a difference between a mildly incorrect student query and the model query which has been given by the instructor. So as I said, for example, if there was an outer join that Sudarshan had written, but the student had written an inner join, he produces a few rows in the database schema such that this is actually, in a sense, elicited out from the underlying database. So it's very carefully targeted to pull out these mistakes. So there it would not be expensive to do.
Okay.
But,
the
creation of the database does take some work because it requires an LP solver and so on. That part is certainly there. But if you trust us, then we would say it's fine. This is only to verify that we're actually given you the right output or not.
Sure, sure. The next question, actually, there are multiple questions for you. It's a very interesting talk. So it's a question from a different angle. So the challenge in analytics is to identify the real intent of the query that's associated. So basically, what's the user's intent and experience?
Okay.
So any of your work scenarios to find out like what actually is being intended or happening?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, because there was a study, in fact, done in Singapore about 2 decades ago, which found that most SQL queries are incorrectly written. That is, you had something in mind and you wrote an SQL equivalent for it, which is what you thought is the equivalent. But actually, often these turn out to be wrong because you have not thought about all the, especially the boundary conditions. and you may have missed out certain predicates and so on. And even after telling people it was wrong, and they went back to the original natural language specs, and you told them, look, what you have written is incorrect. Even after telling them it was incorrect, about 40% of the time it was still wrong. It took multiple iterations to finally converge to the right one. So that translation between the natural language specs, which is what you have in mind, and whether the application faithfully embodies that or not, is not something that we have looked at. We assume that the application as originally written is correct, but it is hidden, and we want to elicit that. But if the original goal was something different and the application is not matching up to that, we won't even be aware of this, that there is a semantic gap between what you want and what you have coded. That's unknown to us. Right?
Sure. And your audience is already trying to apply it to various other places as well. So the next question is, can you apply it on columnar databases, or is it applicable to relational only?
Absolutely, it could be done even in columnar databases, because as you saw, we don't even care what is inside the database engine really. All we are saying is that here is an input and here's an output. We don't know whether it's imperative code. We don't know whether it's a row store. We don't know whether it's a column store. We don't know what is the kind of internal mechanisms at all, because it's completely hidden from us. We are just looking at the input and the output. So as long as it's following, let's say, SQL kind of logic semantics of first and second order logic, beyond that, we really are not concerned as to how you produce the output, or what was the underlying platform or the data storage framework and so on. But the answer that we'll always give will be in SQL format. So you may have imperative code originally, and I will produce SQL. So our output will always be SQL, but that's actually a good thing, because then it allows you to do query optimization, which cannot be done with imperative code. So currently there are several tools that have been developed by the industry, which try to convert imperative code automatically to declarative code, because often programmers find it hard to write SQL correctly. So they take the easy way out and write imperative code. But that is bad from a performance perspective. So ours is also one such tool, whereas where most of the industry tools actually look at the code and then try to figure out what is the equivalent. We are trying to just look at the input and output and figure out what the equivalent is. So to give you an analogy, there are two ways you can do natural language processing. One is to actually learn the grammar. Okay, so you learn Panini's grammar and convert Sanskrit to Hindi or Kannada. The other approach is to use the Google approach, which says, give me millions of examples of translating from Sanskrit to Kannada. And although I don't understand grammar, I know how to translate it by just looking at the prior examples. So we are also doing an example-driven approach where we don't understand what is inside, but we have seen enough instances that I can, in a reasonable sense, guess what you want at the output, given what you show me at the input. So that's the high-level view of this model. But we are absolutely agnostic to the platform and the application.
Great. So we are pretty much on time, and thank you so much, Professor Haritsa.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks for all the questions.
Glad to have you with the session today. Over to you, Anvit.
Thank you so much, Professor Jayant Haritsa. Thank you for unmasking the hidden query, if I may say so. That was a very, very informative and educative session. I'm pretty sure all the attendees here learned a lot of new things and are expecting a lot more to work with it. As Ankit mentioned, it is bordering on something very interesting in terms of white label hacking. Maybe, who knows? Let's see how we can take it off further. Thank you once again for sparing the time, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I'll say hello to Bingsheng, whom I just see on the screen now. Hi, Bingsheng.
Hi, Jayant. Nice to meet you here.
Yeah, looking forward to your talk as well. Yeah, thank you.